It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I'm one of those really lucky people that all my life I've been involved with classical music. I'm passionate about it. It's hard to even consider it a profession because it's just been something I've loved from the time I was a little boy. And I'll give you just a little history because my parents came from Austria. Came here in 1939, a very difficult time. And there were just two of them. And one of my great memories is while they were both obviously alive, having my sisters and I sitting at Thanksgiving with 11 grandchildren at the beginning of a very large family that started with just two people escaping from Austria. And they brought us up in what I would consider very much an Austrian home. I didn't know that at the time, but we were given those kind of values, and especially in music. My sisters and I all studied the piano from the time we were 5. And my parents, who were both medical doctors, would take us to the opera and to the symphony and to the ballet. We were very privileged and very lucky. We didn't know that, but we were. And when I was 7, I was taken to a movie of Aida, and I heard the triumphal march in the 3rd act. And at that moment, I said, I want to play the trumpet. Now, for a Jewish boy with doctors as parents, you don't play the trumpet. You could play the violin or the piano, maybe the cello, but certainly not the trumpet. So I said to my parents I wanted to play the trumpet, and they said, sure, you're on your own. And I often think about what attracted me to that instrument. Was it the sound of the instrument? Was it that great Verdi melody? Who knows? But there I was when I was 8, lucky enough to be able to put the money together from shining shoes, which I did, to rent a trumpet and to begin my trumpet lessons. When I was 12, I was playing in a youth orchestra, and we played the Sibelius Second Symphony. And that was the moment that I said, okay, that's it for me. I want to be a musician. Now, I didn't know what that really meant. I didn't know if you could make a living doing it. That was not an issue. I didn't know if you could do some good in society. That wasn't a question either. I loved it so much. I was so passionate about it. It was so beautiful. It was so touching. And there was so much gratification that came from learning how to play. You have an instrument, you have a line, you can't play, and you practice it, and all of a sudden you can play it. Wow, what have I done? I've focused, I've persevered, I've accomplished something, and I feel great self-esteem because I've accomplished it. Then I take that passage and play it in the youth orchestra or the band, and we're all doing it together, and we're all having this incredible time of communicating through music, communicating through the leadership of the conductor or the leadership of our section. We're trying to work together. And we're all winning because there are no losers. It's not like a sports event where some team loses, some team wins, and you see a big tennis match, and at the end someone's crying and someone's, kissing God. So for us, it was just all success. And what's interesting now, of course, is we see all these studies from all over the country that show us that if you study music, you will do better in school. Now, that's not the reason that you should love classical music, I don't think. I think it's a great art form. It can be very touching. It can be very meaningful to you. I mean, so many of us have examples of friends. I have one friend, for example, who's a recovering alcoholic, and the way he's been able to, for 30 years, not drink is through AA and through classical music. I know an incredible woman who wanted to drop out of high school because she was bored. She was very smart. She was in school in, I think, Idaho, and went to her father and said, I don't want to go to school anymore. And her father said, is there nothing there that you love? She said, it's so boring. And everybody takes so slow. I could learn all this stuff in a week that they teach in a month. He said, there's nothing at all. Well, she said, I like the chorus. Really? Oh, I love it. I love the singing. I love the performing. I love working with the other kids. I love creating some kind of greater whole than my little part. And he said, well, she finished high school because of that. The numbers are extraordinary. Recently, in the Metro Nashville area, they instituted a big music program. And these are the numbers. If you had no music in public school, there was a 40% chance that you would graduate high school in 4 years. If you had 1 year of music, it went up to 81%. If you had 2 or more years of music, you would graduate high school 91% in 4 years. I mean, it's remarkable. We've seen these studies from Texas, from Florida, from Louisiana, from Washington State, from everywhere. And there are no downsides. There is not one example that says it's not true. We've seen an example of youngsters in elementary school from Rhode Island. I mean, music education needs to be a core chorus taught in every school. You should be able to play an instrument the way so many of us did when we were kids. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, wasn't an affluent town at all, and in my elementary school we had a band, a chorus, and an orchestra. I remember 20 years later, maybe 30 years later, when someone from the high school called me and said, would I come and speak to the Board of Education because they were eliminating the last music teacher in that town. It's really quite shocking what has happened. Even in New York City, recently in the New York Times, you read that most schools do not have a minimum, do not attain the minimum requirement in the arts education in New York City. It's quite extraordinary. So I went from this child of 12 wanting to be a trumpet player to eventually being in the New York Philharmonic, and I was very lucky to be part of the first Live from Lincoln Center show that John Goberman produced when I was in the New York Philharmonic. Then I became mostly Mozart music director for 20 years, and I did probably 18 TV shows there. I mention these TV shows for a reason you'll see in a moment. Then I went to Seattle, and I spent 26 years there and won 2 Emmys with some TV shows. And all told, I also made 350 CDs. So my life was involved around electronic media in some fashion or another. I cared about it. I loved it. I loved playing concerts for people, but I also loved getting things really perfectly like you could on a recording, or bring music to many, many more people. So many times I received letters, especially from older people during those mostly Mozart years, that told me that they're in a nursing home or an assisted living place, they can't go to concerts anymore, and they could enjoy Mozart on television. This stuck with me because I believe that there are 3 big issues that keep people from enjoying, appreciating, and experiencing great classical music. The first one is exposure. If you've never heard it, well, then you can't even not like it. You really can't like it. The numbers there are quite extraordinary, too. Kids who've gone through high school, only 8% have ever heard a classical music concert. People who have gone through graduate school, 40% have heard a classical music concert, which means 60% of graduates from graduate school have never even heard a classical music concert. So if you believe in the power of music, then you have to begin from the actual music itself. So after I left Seattle, I had a vision for something bigger, something more important that I wanted to do. I cared about the audience. I cared about the pieces, the composers, but about all of you. And I wanted to make sure that what we did, and if we believe that it's important, we believe that it does good, and it's important for civilization, important for society, that you have an opportunity to hear. What better way than on television? And in our country, public television is the best way. No cable necessary, everybody has TV sets, and there are lots of stations. So with a partnership with WNET-TV here in New York, Channel 13, we created an orchestra called the All-Star Orchestra, made up of musicians from all over the country. The idea was not to take New York musicians and just do a New York show, or San Francisco, or Seattle, or Houston, but the 30 orchestras are represented so that everybody is there. The principal second from the New York Philharmonic sits next to the principal second from the Philadelphia Orchestra. The principal oboe from Boston sits next to the principal flute from Philadelphia. I mean, it's an extraordinary experience. People that I've known for many years who I picked to come to New York to spend 4 days and record 8 shows. Think of that, 4 days, 8-hour-long television shows. It's quite remarkable. And the idea was really quite simple. We wanted to get the best players we could, bring them together, play the great masterpieces, Beethoven, Brahms, Schumann, Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, and new works by living composers. And from that, we would create 8-hour-long TV shows, and more importantly, a very large educational back end. So the first thing I'm going to show you a bunch of clips now. The first thing I'm going to show you is 1 minute of a performance that we did for television of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. For us, I believed, that the music has to be played in its entirety. So when we came up with this idea, people said, well, why don't you stop between movements? You can discuss each movement, do a little education. And I said, you know, if you really believe in music and you believe in its power, it needs to be heard totally. It needs to be heard from the beginning to the end. So, for example, on this show, we did the Beethoven Fifth, and we did a short piece of Philip Glass. Each program had a little education. Not a lot of education. It wasn't going into great depths of understanding what this piece is about or what Beethoven's about. But the idea was that we would carry this further and create a website and hopefully work with partners to make sure that this music and the educational part is available to everyone. We've been successful. This week or next week, this whole educational, or at least part of the whole educational experiment will be on the Khan Academy. You all know about the Khan Academy, 10 million people a month, 350,000 teachers subscribing in 200 countries. So it'll be the first time that they have music on the Khan Academy. And we divide it into many sections. One is a very simple section. The instruments of the orchestra. I talked to a music lover the other day who was quite sophisticated. And she said to me, well, you know the oboe? And I said, I know the oboe. She said, well, what about that instrument that's longer? What's that called? I said, well, that's called an English horn. Well, we have a little demonstration of every instrument in the orchestra, from the violin to the tuba to the timpani to the English horn. So, Chris, if we can, I'd like to give you a little example of one of those demonstrations. This is the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra demonstrating the violin for us.
If you look at a violin, it's very much like a human body. It has shoulders, and we call this the neck. And it's not the head, but we call it the scroll. It's like a rolled piece of paper scroll. And these are the ribs and the back. And a violin is made from kind of the same trees you might see in your backyard, spruce and maple. This one was made in 1757 in Milan, Italy, by a man named Guadagnini. And all the men in the Guadagnini family made violins.
What's so interesting to me about this whole project is that everyone said it couldn't be done. Everyone said you can't bring together 95 musicians and have them play like an ensemble. It's impossible in 4 days to make 8 television shows. And not only that, but public television isn't going to show it because they don't like classical music because it doesn't have a large enough audience, which of course goes exactly against what public television is all about. We were successful in every way. We got great musicians. They played fabulously together. Public television, 75% of the country was represented. In fact, in our old hometown, Seattle, at KCTS-TV, they brought me in to do their pledge drive one Saturday night and showed one of our shows. And you know that the pledge drive is for the most popular shows, and we were one of the most popular shows they've ever had on KCTS. We're trying to deal with exposing people to great art and to educate them as much as they want to be educated. We believe, as I'm sure all of you do, that the more you know, the more you can enjoy something. And what's interesting for me, of course, is a question I should have asked a little bit ago, is that just out of curiosity, how many of you have ever heard the Beethoven Fifth in a concert live? Probably not half. I remember giving a talk at Seattle Pacific University of 200 music students, and I used to do the Beethoven Ninth every year, 5 times between Christmas and New Year's. I probably conducted this piece 60 times. It's a joy. Every time I do it, it's so special, so remarkable, so unique. And yet, of the 200 kids, I think 3 had ever heard it live. I remember when I was music director at Mozart, on occasion I'd be criticized for doing the Mozart Jupiter Symphony every 3 years because we've all heard that before. I mean, isn't that a bizarre criticism that great art shouldn't be heard regularly and that in fact, well, some critics maybe are not as interested in listening to the same piece in different kind of performances, but the audience and certainly the performers are very interested. Then what we're trying to do is, this is without question the most important thing I've ever done. Our second season recordings will be done at the end of August. They're done at Manhattan Center on 34th Street. And when you have this is like a startup, so everything about it is new. No one on that stage, it's not a stage really, has ever done done made-for-television classical music before. In this country, we haven't had made-for-television classical music since the 1950s. We have live concerts that are broadcast. The New York Philharmonic we see quite regularly, but we don't have actual made-for-television. This is made for, you can get shots that you can't get any other time. And for these musicians, it's their legacy too, because so few orchestras are on TV. It's really quite something. We try also now to talk about the pieces. So I'll give you a little excerpt of Leon Botstein and I talking about the Beethoven Fifth. The Fifth Symphony is arguably the most important single symphonic work since the classical period. And we think of Beethoven as a revolutionary, as a romantic, and extending the orchestra, expanding the symphonic form and all of that.
You take the simplest musical idea, 4 notes, and can you make a castle out of 4 notes? And indeed he does. The first movement, which is its most famous movement, is a dense, absolutely compact, brilliant, one long sentence. One breath, and it's over.
When it was premiered in 1808, it was premiered in December in a theater in Vienna. The heat didn't work that day. Can you imagine what the audience was feeling? First of all, it was cold, and the musicians were feeling the cold. And Beethoven was conducting and playing the piano. He premiered the Sixth Symphony and the Fifth Symphony at the same concert, plus the Fourth Piano Concerto, which he played. He conducted the aria a perfido that he wrote. He even had a chorus, and he did the great choral fantasy. Think about the event that was going, and the length of the event, and the fact that everyone was so cold. We interview all of the living composers. They all speak about their pieces, including Augusta Reed Thomas and Ellen Zwillich. And finally, we're dealing with something, especially for the Khan Academy, that is the fundamentals of music.
A note represents the pitch and duration of a musical sound. Let's begin with duration or note value. Here are 5 note values. A half note would get half of the whole, or 2 beats. Let's listen to the beginning of Dvorak's New World Symphony's slow movement. This brass chorale has 3 measures, or 3 bars of half notes, and then 1 measure of a whole note.
What we're trying to do is give more tools to the teachers. We certainly are not going to replace them. There's no way. They're the people in the trenches who are doing the hard, incredible work. We're trying to encourage school systems. We're trying to encourage everyone to be involved with music education for many reasons, as I've, I think, explained. But we're trying to give the teachers as many tools as they can to inspire their students. I remember we did one test with an orchestra, a very fine orchestra outside of Minneapolis, and we played for them the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, and we had comments from them. And the most interesting comment for me was most of them had never heard the piece all the way through. So this is the most important thing I've ever done in my life. It's the next mountain that I'm climbing. And besides my guest conducting and composing, I'm dedicating my life to it, and hoping that together, all of us involved with the All-Star Orchestra are going to, in some way, change the world. And I appreciate it so much for your time. Thank you.